Welcome back to On Texas Football, a little weekend talking of the quarterbacks into the SEC. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Gerry Hamilton on the road today. But hey, moving into the SEC, Texas is expected to make some noise, coming off of a college football playoff appearance this past season. The expectations are high. And when you return a talented third-year starting quarterback in Quinn Ewers, you're going to have some really high expectations in that regard. But that also leads to the question of, just where does Quinn kind of sit in the SEC and also in the national kind of rankings when it comes to the quarterback room. A really talented class this past season just departed for the NFL, and now you're looking at Quinn Ewers and potentially Carson Beck to kind of be that 1-2 in the SEC. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But Gerry, first, I wanted to get your thoughts because Quinn and Jaylen are the two quarterbacks from the college football playoff to return. There's a lot of expectations on them and what they should do and what they can provide for their teams in 2024. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, one, what would be a good season for Quinn Ewers? And then two, where does he kind of sit in your eyes when it comes to the evaluations of other SEC quarterbacks and Quinn Ewers?
Yeah, so I think as a passer, natural passer, I think he's the best of all the guys in the SEC. I don't think there's almost any doubt in that. And maybe that's recency bias because we just watched him at Pro Day, CJ, yep. But going back and watching him in high school as well, just such a natural passer, right? And now he's getting to that point where, okay, you started more than 25, or this year you'll have started more than 25 games in college football, and you're a third-year returning starter. You're a third year in a system, which I think is a big deal. I mean, even if you look at Carson Beck and Jalen Milroe, look, Carson Beck's second year with Bobo. Jalen Milroe, first year. He's had some change at offensive coordinator every year he's been there. And as a second-year starter, Jalen Milroe has a new offensive coordinator, new play caller, right? Yep. So there's the most familiarity for Quinn and Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. But still, Quinn's still the only third-year guy, starting with the same coordinator, same quarterback coach, same head coach. So I think there's a lot of comfort that Quinn's going to have this year. Yep. And with comfort breeds confidence. When you started a lot of games, you're in the same system. I think Quinn is set up to have a tremendous season. And if you're asking like statistics, I'm not sure yards matter necessarily. He'll complete, it's a downfield passing scheme. So he's not going to go complete 75, 76%. Right. If he hits that 71 number, I mean, for instance, Tua Tagovailoa completed 69 and 71% his 2 years as a starter at Alabama. So if you're in that 69, 71% area in a Steve Sarkisian offense, you're doing very well. That's what Quinn was last year. So I expect something in that 70 to 72 range this year for Quinn. But the key number is TDs versus interceptions for me, CJ. If you get to 4.5, 5 to 1 in that scenario, he's had a hell of a year.
Yeah, 3.6, right around that number was what Quinn was ending up at last year, 22-6 touchdown interception ratio. Again, maybe the yards, the touchdowns might not have, stacked up with what we saw from other national, appraised quarterbacks at the time last year. But, when you watch him play in the down-to-down, again, as natural of a thrower that you'll find in the country. And we just saw that at the Texas Pro Day in front of 90-plus scouts and 3 NFL head coaches. Only one ball really hit the ground because of Quinn Ewers. It was an overthrow and an out route, which he quickly corrected on the next rep. Now kind of getting into the SEC quarterback rankings. Again, I'll throw this up on Twitter. You'll see the graphic on the screen here in a second as well. It's interesting because there's a number of guys that have started that have transferred in. There's a number of guys returning, and then there's guys at the very top. But, Gerry, we're going to start with a couple guys that don't really have a whole lot of experience in totality. Lenore Sellers at South Carolina, stepping in for Spencer Rattler, who's departed for the NFL. And Brock Vandergriff, the former 5-star quarterback at Georgia, is transferred in as the expected starter at Kentucky, replacing Devin Leary. So 2 guys you don't know a whole lot of. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think Vandergriff will be interesting because it's Kentucky needs to run the football to be successful. They're going to run the football to be successful. Georgia did run the football to be successful, right? I mean, so I think while the scheme is different, right? Signals are going to be different. All that play calls are going to be different for Vandergriff. There's still at least a familiarity with offensive scheme there. But he's also had multiple years to kind of build that body, right? Develop mechanically, whether that's under Monken or Coach Bobo. So I think he's going to be further ahead in the developmental process to Sellers. But and here's the other thing with Vandergriff. What he's got going for him, Barry and Brown, and another really good receiver out of the portal. So he's got a number 1 receiver and a number 2 receiver. So he is in a position to be pretty successful out of the gate because Barry and Brown will be first, second round type draft pick next year. So he's got a couple of guys that can make plays for him to where it's not going to be all on him to make plays. Obviously South Carolina we'll have a wide receiver drafted here coming up, but I think Vandergriff has better parts around him in the passing game right out of the gate.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see just what happens with the wide receiving group in South Carolina. Again, Xavier Legette expected to be drafted.
Yeah.
Juice Wells just hit the portal as
That's
well.
Right.
2 very talented wide receivers that are leaving the program, as well as Justin Stepp, their wide receivers coach who took the job at Illinois. So a bit of a question mark to see who they will be throwing the ball to in South Carolina. But now let's move to the transfer in guys. There's a pretty solid group of them when you look at it. Taylen Green coming in from Boise State up at Arkansas, really talented 2-way guy. Diego Pavia, who put up some really impressive numbers at New Mexico State, is now at Vanderbilt. And Blake Shapen, a familiar name from Baylor, now at Mississippi State. I wanted to start with Pavia because I think he's probably the guy that if you played him would probably put a little bit more fear in you because of his ability to run as well. Nearly 3,000 passing yards, 1,000 yards on the ground, 35 total touchdowns. I mean, it feels to me, and I know Vanderbilt's going to be limited with what they have athletically, but this is a guy that might be able to make some noise or surprise some people, again, depending on what they are able to surround him with as well.
Yeah, his legs are going to have to do some work for him at Vanderbilt, right? I mean, their offensive line, while it's not void of talent, the D-line they go up against on a week-in, week-out basis puts a lot of pressure on a quarterback and offensive line. So his ability to move, I think, is going to be key for Vanderbilt, and they're trying to ascend a little bit in the SEC. They're up against it. I think the quarterback with the most pressure is Taylen Green because his coach is under the gun.
Yeah,
I mean, so look, he's coming in to a situation where is there going to be a coaching change there? Arkansas has to play really well for there not to be a coaching change next year. So there was almost a coaching change this year in Fayetteville. So that adds some pressure to a transfer quarterback because you're pretty much playing for the coach's job who just recruited you out of the portal. So I think that'll be interesting with Taylen Green and as much turnover as they've had in Arkansas. I think they have pretty good offensive line around him. Blake Shapen, obviously new coaching staff. He has a little time. I think that offensive scheme is going to be good for him. I think it fits his skill set very well. So we'll have to see there. But again, Taylen Green, I think, has the most difficult job of those transfers.
Yeah, I'm with you. Also, really interesting because he needs to take that step forward. And I think that's what hindered KJ Jefferson at Arkansas was the consistency at the passing game. 11 touchdowns to 9 interceptions last year at Boise State. In the SEC, those numbers are not going to get you very far. So we'll see again. Arkansas with Pittman, you're expecting to see a pretty strong offensive line. His creativeness out of the backfield in the running game should be a strength of his. And we'll see how often they go to the design QB run there. Gerry, the next category here is going to be the second-year former Big Ten transfers. And this is kind of that interesting spot right here. Of course, Peyton Thorne is in there and Graham Mertz, 2 guys that moved from the Big Ten to the SEC a year ago. I actually was impressed a little bit with Graham Mertz. I know that the Florida season wasn't great, but he actually played, at least to me, much more impressive than I anticipated coming in from what we saw of him in the Big Ten at the time.
Yeah, so I think with the right parts around him, he can help Florida win football games, right? He's not a hindrance to Florida winning games. I know there's some talk that DJ Lagway's may be the guy there. It's tough to beat out a guy that started as many games as Graham Mertz has. Mm-hmm. So, and especially when Billy Napier's coaching for his job. I don't think this is a situation where you can say, oh, I'm going to the young 5-star, so give me some more time. Florida fans aren't going for that. Right. So I think Graham Mertz is, again, similar to Taylen Green, though. Graham Mertz has some pressure on him because Florida, he's also Mertz also going to play the toughest schedule in the country.
Poor guy.
Schedule I've ever seen, right? But I'm here to tell you, Eugene Wilson, the soon-to-be sophomore receiver at Florida, he's one of the best young receivers in the country. He can make plays for you after the catch. I don't think Florida's void of skill talent at receiver. I think they've got enough parts around Mertz. He's just got a big job with that schedule. I mean, Miami right out of the gate. I mean, there's pressure on him and there's pressure on Billy Napier this year. But I do think Mertz is positioned a little better than Thorne is, but not much, just a little better.
Yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts again. Auburn's bringing in some really talented wide receivers as well. That could certainly, help Thorne a little bit at Auburn. Mertz actually 2,900 yards on 73% completion, right. 20-3 touchdown to interception ratio. So I was surprised.
And CJ, he may not be making a lot of big throws down the field, but he's also not hurting his team with turnovers.
Yep.
So he's accurate accurate enough in the short and intermediate game that he's giving his receivers a chance to make plays for him.
I'll ask it this way, because the conversation about Billy Napier and if Texas will see him on the field next year, the odds that Texas sees Graham Mertz on the field compared to Billy Napier are significantly higher in your eyes?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I definitely think so. I think I watched DJ Lagway in high school, and I think DJ Lagway is a really good prospect. Throwing him into the Wolves with this schedule doesn't seem like the best decision.
No.
Does not seem. Even though he had a really good senior year, and he played for a really good coach at Willis, good offensive mind. These guys still need time. I know he's in for spring practice, but that's not the situation I would want to throw DJ Lagway into next year.
No, I'm right there 100%. But I did want to move into a familiar spot. Jackson Arnold comes in at number 9 for me, and that might feel a little low. Former 5-star guy out of Denton Guyer. Great program up there as well. I loved getting to see him and watch him perform. Two-sport guy with a baseball background as well. A lot of fans are going to look at that bowl game against Arizona and say, you know what? I don't know if this is the 5-star guy we were promised. But to me, you can throw that bowl game out of the window. I think that there were times where he had good moments, times where he'd obviously like to have some passes back. To me, it's more about the experience of what it's to be a starter, to get, the basically the week of preparation, month of preparation for a bowl game, and then go play. That's, to me, you're going to see a much better Jackson Arnold in 2024 than you saw obviously last year. I thought that there were flashes, but I want to hear it from you because you've seen him several times. Yeah. He's got a lively arm, can put the ball down the field in tight spots. We're going to see a jump, are we not?
I think it's going to be interesting. I think he actually has the most pressure on him of any quarterback on this list. And I say that because I think we know Beck and Ewers and Milroe and Dart are going to play at a certain level, right? I mean, and they have a lot of talent around them. Jackson Arnold, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line. He's got some good receivers around him, new running backs as well. He's not seeing a lot of familiar faces this spring. So he's going into a first-year starting role with new OC, right? New offensive line. And doesn't mean they're going to be void of experience, just a lot of new transfers in, new offensive linemen in the program. So he's got a lot of pressure on him, and being the quarterback at Oklahoma when Oklahoma let Dylan Gabriel walk to Oregon. That puts a lot of pressure on a first-year starting quarterback. Oklahoma made a decision to go with Jackson Arnold and let Dylan Gabriel go.
That's a great point.
That brings a lot of pressure on the guy that's next up at Oklahoma. And coming out of high school, I'll say this. I talked to a high school coach that played them in the playoffs, and he said he was a one-read quarterback coming out of high school. If you took away that first read, he said he struggled in the game they were at, and this coach and the team that played Guyer. So how much has he progressed, and how much are they going to have to protect him in year one as a starter at Oklahoma? But I think he's got the most pressure of any of these quarterbacks on the list, because Dylan Gabriel went to Oregon, and he had a year left. New offensive line, new offensive coordinator, first year in the SEC for Oklahoma. Oh, and by the way, the expectations for the Oklahoma program in year 3 under Brent Venables. A lot of pressure on Jackson Arnold.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned it there at the end, being the quarterback at Oklahoma with the run that they've had over the last 10 years, a lot of pressure.
And add this in, CJ. Even though Oklahoma beat Texas last year, Texas won the Big 12, was in the playoff. I mean, that adds even more pressure to Jackson Arnold. I mean, so Jackson Arnold's in a pressure cooker this year. It's going to be interesting to see how well he plays. But he's got good feet. He's a slick athlete, similar to Arch Manning, not that fast of an athlete like Arch's, but he's slick enough to move around in the pocket and make some plays with his feet.
Good stuff. One thing that will help him is a wide receiver corps that will go up with just about anybody in the SEC. Deion Burks, Andrell Anthony, and Nick Anderson. 3 really talented wide receivers there. No Drake Stoops, kind of the safety blanket for OU over the last couple of years. So we'll see kind of how that role's filled. Deion Burks.
Stogner gone at tight end. So they've got to – but you're right. How Andrell Anthony comes off that knee is big. Nick Anderson's going to play 8-10 years in the NFL. Deion Burks is a good after-the-catch guy that can play in the slot. The return of Andrell Anthony and some of those young receivers maturing is going to be key. But like we said, Jackson Arnold's in a pressure cooker this year.
Yep. Moving to the top half of the SEC, and in my eyes, the quarterback rankings, I have Garrett Nosh at 8. And again, not a whole lot of experience, but he is in a very friendly system for the quarterback. We just saw what Jaden Daniels did, winning the Heisman, throwing the ball deep to a number of really talented wide receivers. Garrett Nussmeier, just under 220 career attempts, 11 touchdowns in that regard as well. So about a 5% touchdown percentage clip. Not too bad, but comes from a quarterback family and is a guy who's been around the game for a while. Walking in to replace a Heisman winner, not the easiest task. You know, those are big shoes to fill. But this is a guy that knows ball, and he's been around football for a while. I think you might see some pretty impressive numbers from him in 2024.
You know, we had him when I was at ESPN Under Armour. We had him as the quarterback at the Deion Sanders Prime 21 camp. And my biggest takeaway from Garrett then was he had moxie. The guys liked him. They liked running routes for him. There was a real immediate camaraderie with him. He's got the personality. He's got the moxie. Like you said, he grew up quarterback, right? He's got a future draft pick protecting his blind side. That helps. He's going to have a decent running game with that. And LSU, despite what they lost at receiver talent, they're going to have talent at wide receiver. It may not be the level they've lost with 2 first-round draft picks essentially. But again, he's got the moxie. He's kind of got that quarterback gamesmanship to him. And that's going to give him a chance to me to hold off the challengers behind him. And I do think if they will protect him, he'll protect the football and make plays for LSU.
That's part of knowing the game, being cerebral with the offense. And, of course, he's been in the system for a few years as well. Certainly helps. To number 7, Nico Lawrence out of Tennessee. Really talented kid. Another 5-star prospect, really starting to take the reins of an SEC program. And at Tennessee, who's kind of was on that doorstep of becoming that elite program again, I think they're looking at Nico as that guy that can get them over the hump. You know, Joe Milton had the big arm, didn't put up the numbers on the field. Nico looks like he could be that guy.
Outside of Arch Manning, he's got the most pressure on him. Jackson Arnold, I think, does next year, but in general, as a quarterback, Nico's it, because Tennessee's looking at him as the savior. Whether that's fair or not, the NIL money deal has been out there, right? So since high school, there adds a big layer of pressure for Nico and Josh Heupel as they try to get over that hump, like you say. And look, Alabama just had a coaching change, right? I mean, so people smell a little blood in the water, even though I wouldn't, because I think Kalen DeBoer is fabulous. The reality is Tennessee's like, okay, now's our time. All right, Nico, go put the program on your shoulders and go get it done. It's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure on a guy. I think he's got very good feet. I think he's a very good playmaker when things break down. Not necessarily a guy that's going to tuck it and run a lot, but he definitely can. He's an athlete playing quarterback with a live arm. Here's the thing that's going to be big for him. Even last year in the bowl game, right? Now he faces defenses that are going to scheme against what they think are his weaknesses or his inexperience. That's what's going to come into play for Nico as a first-year starter. How does he handle that? His adversity hasn't hit yet on Saturdays. What's going to happen when his adversity eventually hits? That's going to tell the story with Nico. How does he handle the pressure? What happens when the adversity hits? And how is he going to handle teams' game planning for him for the first time in his life? That high school doesn't count. The bowl game wasn't that. This season, now that he has a game of tape, people are going to be like, all right, this is what we think his strengths are. This is what we think his weaknesses are. All right, Nico, go show us that you can beat us when we're making you work towards your weakness as a player. That's going to be key for him.
Does he eventually have the talent in your eyes to be a Heisman candidate?
I think he does. I think in today's day and age of college football, I think he does for sure, because he's going to make wow plays, I think, with his arm and his feet, just extension of plays before he even tucks the ball. I think he's got that, and I think he's got the hype around him. If you have the hype around you and you deliver, you get in the Heisman conversation if your team wins enough.
Good stuff. I wanted to move to 6. Again, just missing the top 5. I think some folks after this past season probably would have had this guy in their top 5. Brady Cook out of Missouri, quarterback. I think what that bowl game against Ohio State taught me was that Brady Cook can win you games in different ways. That was an ugly rock fight against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. Not a lot of points from what was a pretty fun, explosive offense with those wide receivers of Luther Burden, Mookie Cooper, Theo Weiss. Really talented wide receiving group. But there just wasn't a lot of rhythm there. But hey, Brady Cook, to his credit, I thought found a way to win football games, and that was impressive last year for me. Finished top 10 in the country, I believe. Only 319 rushing yards, which feels low because he is a good athlete.
He is
and
a good
he can
athlete.
beat you with his legs. But to me, that step up will be that more explosive creativeness in the playmaking ability with his legs will be something that I keep an eye on for 2024.
Yeah, I think so. And you have to incorporate that a little bit without taking putting the health of the quarterback in jeopardy, right? But he's got really good players to throw it to. He's got playmakers. Luther Burden will be a high draft pick one day, in my estimation. Whether that's first, second, third round, he's still going to be a draft pick at wide receiver. Excellent player. Look, they lost a really good running back. He lost somebody he could hand the ball off to and rely on. Right. So they have to replace that. But I like Brady Cook. I like his accuracy. I like his athleticism. So if you combine accuracy and athleticism, if your offensive line can protect for you in the SEC, you're going to actually be really good. And, I know we talk about this list, but this is the fun thing about it. I would have him over Connor Weigman right now. And let's see if Weigman can stay healthy. My concern with Weigman is how healthy is this guy going to stay, man? He's had a rough go with concussions from high school. And then last year with the talus bone, that's a big injury for him. But I think Brady Cook is probably one of the more underrated football players in the country.
He kind of has some Sam Ehlinger in him to me. Yeah. He just finds a way to put his team in a position to win football games, and I appreciate that from the quarterback spot. But I do have Connor Weigman at number 5, and he does crack the top 5 for me because when he is healthy, we've seen some really impressive stuff. 16 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in his career. Yep. Only played 4 games last year, the first 4 because of that season-ending injury. But again, this was a former 5-star guy with a baseball background, can make the off-platform throws, can maneuver very well in the pocket because, again, he's had to. A&M, for all the numbers and stars that you've seen added to that program, for whatever reason, that offensive line has remained a little bit shaky. Yes. As a result, he's been on the move in the backfield quite a bit in his career. But again, if you give him a pocket to throw in, I think he's got a very lively arm and he can make some really impressive plays.
It's going to be interesting to see how A&M uses him. What's this offensive scheme really going to look like with Colin Klein? Look, coming off the injury he had, I'm not sure you can run him much. Yeah. And here's the other thing with Connor. Is he going to let it go? That was a serious injury he had. I mean, that cost him a season after he got hurt. So what is that going to look like for him? Is he going to turn it loose at the quarterback position? Because he does throw it well. He throws it in the short, intermediate, and down the field well. Can A&M protect him is going to be a big one. Because, look, as many injuries as he's had, if he doesn't have confidence in his offensive line to protect him, it's going to affect his play. So I think that's going to be key, is how much improved is A&M's offensive line. If it's improved and Weigman does turn it loose and doesn't worry about a post-injury, then I think he'll have a really good season despite losing Evan Stewart. I think they're going to have enough players around him.
And now I wanted to combine 3 and 4 because to me it was a coin flip.
You were different on this one.
Jackson Dart and Jaylen Milroe. I had
Yep.
Milroe above Dart, but again, it was a last second change to me, and I'm not sure what it was that again, just watching the two of them, I said, all right, I like the upside with Milroe. I think it was the high ceiling of what he can do on the football field that really struck a chord with me that put him above Dart. Interestingly enough, Dart had pretty similar numbers to Ewers last year. And they weren't gaudy numbers. They weren't video game numbers, despite playing in a Lane Kiffin system, similar to Sarkisian and Ewers. But 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 3,300 yards, and 65% completion. You won't be mad at that, but you probably expect a little bit more with those weapons, those pieces, that system, and that head coach. What's the differentiator for you with Milroe and Beck? Or Dart, sorry.
So I think Dart, third year in system, a lot of time with Lane Kiffin, right? Last year of college football. If the rebuilt offensive line is really good around Dart, I think he's going to have a hell of a year. I know they lost Quinshon Judkins, but you mentioned Juice Wells transferred in, gives him another guy if he's healthy at wide receiver. So I think Jackson Dart is set up to have a really, really good season. I think Jaylen Milroe's the most interesting quarterback in the country, though, CJ, because it's going to be year 2 starting. Kalen DeBoer is a massive, massive step up from a coordinator, play caller, play designer from, no offense to Tommy Rees and Nick at Bama, but Kalen DeBoer he's a top 3 guy in the country, if not number 1. So the thing with Milroe that's going to make him so intriguing for me is he's never been accurate. How much does he develop with DeBoer? DeBoer's not going to have the same passing scheme. He's going to have the scheme. He's going to have elements of it, but it can't be the same as with Michael Penix. It just can't. It's different quarterbacks. But if Milroe takes a big enough step to where DeBoer can install a lot of his, even if it's 75% of what he wants to do, with the legs Milroe has, Milroe may have a hellacious season.
Yeah.
If the offensive line, because I think DeBoer schemes around offensive line. I think he'll move the pocket, right? I think he's going to put Jaylen in position to be very successful. If Jaylen delivers in his growth as a quarterback in Kalen DeBoer's system, I think he's going to have a big time year. And I know Alabama lost some, Nyblack, Bond, 2 of the guys they've lost, but Alabama's not void of talent. No. I think Milroe's set up to may have the biggest quarterback jump from last year to this year in college football. If he can if Kalen DeBoer can get enough of his system installed for Milroe, and Milroe makes a jump as a thrower under DeBoer, which I think he will. It's just going to be how big. If he makes a big jump, watch out for Jaylen Milroe.
I'm right there with you. I had him at 3 because, again, I just think that ceiling is he brings something to the table from a skill set perspective that not many quarterbacks in the country can match. Yeah. That speed and that elusiveness. The deep ball was there. It's what you can do when that first read isn't there that Jaylen Milroe needs to improve on. Texas took advantage of that twice in their trip to Tuscaloosa last year, which good segue there. I have Quinn Ewers at 2. And I know Texas fans might look at that and say, how? Quinn just lit it up in front of pro scouts. He had a pretty good second season under Sarkisian, was a former number 1 overall prospect coming out of high school. Why is he at 2? Well, it's for what we've all covered throughout this offseason so far. There's self-sacks that he's got to take care of. The red zone wasn't pretty last year. And like you mentioned earlier, and what he can improve on, when that first read isn't there, going to the second. And if that's not there, finding a third before bailing and giving up on a play. Again, Quinn's incredibly talented. That's not up for debate. But when it comes to winning games as a football quarterback and putting your team in a position to take over games, I think I see that just a little bit more out of Carson Beck right now. And I think a little bit of that is the pieces around him, if that makes sense. Not a lot of that credit last year went to Quinn Ewers when it came down to it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I think Carson Beck has more as crazy as this sounds, the Texas quarterback fishbowl. I think Carson Beck has more pressure on him than Quinn this year because Ladd's gone, Brock Bowers is gone at Georgia. Running backs are gone. I know they got ETN out of the portal. They do have 4 offensive linemen back that started that bowl route of FSU. I think Carson Beck, especially since Georgia was number 1 last year and fell 1 game short of having a chance to three-peat, I think he's got a lot. I think Carson Beck's got a lot of pressure on him this year. A lot, because he lost his safety blankets, both of them. He lost his top playmakers in the passing game, both of them. And now he's got the expectation of, all right, Georgia's going to be number 1 preseason. Y'all didn't get it done last year. Time to go get it done. Oh, and by the way, you got to go play at Alabama and Texas this year. So I think Carson Beck's got a lot of pressure on him this year. Now, the Texas fishbowl with the Texas media in general is that's a lot for a quarterback. And the expectations on Quinn are extraordinarily high as well. I would probably have Quinn, and this is what's great about these conversations. I'd probably have Quinn 1 because I do think that year 3 in the same system, is going to be really big for him. I think there's so much talent at every position around him at the skill spots. Not that Georgia doesn't, but I think Texas may have more proven talent around him. And if you think about having Niblack, if Niblack unlocks the offense vertically a little bit more than even JT did, and I think that's what the thinking in Austin is, I think Quinn's set up to have a tremendous season. And I'll say this too for Quinn. I think the pro day Wednesday is going to, and even though it's on air, you still have, look, I've said, we still talked about it on the live stream. That's the first time he was ever a PGA Tour golfer with all that pressure. There's no helmet on you and everybody's watching your every move. And he delivered in that setting. So I think his confidence is going to be sky high at an all-time high as a college player the rest of the spring and headed into next year. I would go slightly Quinn, but I'll tell you what, CJ, those guys, both of them, have a ton of pressure on them because here's the reality of the expectations for these guys. College football playoff, well, first SEC championship, college football playoff, national championship. They've got the same expectations on them.
Absolutely.
We'll see which one delivers.
Yep. And I wanted to touch back on my point of Quinn taking over games. It came off a little funky, but there were 6 games last year where he only threw for 1 touchdown. And a couple of those games, a little tighter than you expected, but Washington only 1 passing touchdown. Wyoming only 1 passing touchdown. And then, there were a couple others in the mix as well. Iowa State and TCU on the road, 2 tough games. But to me, for Quinn, it's the hot starts, getting out there and just taking control. It didn't feel like his team last year. This year, the expectation is he's the elder statesman in the room. He's got to take command. He's got to be that leader in the huddle because, again, with the helmet communication coming in, a lot of that responsibility and play call and everything that goes in on the play call is going to come through him. So I'd like to see him take that jump up. I do think it's very possible and almost likely with the pieces Texas has around him that we look back at this and say, yeah, by the end of this conversation next year, he is your best number 1 quarterback in the SEC.
I'm going to add one other thing, CJ. If Sark and Quinn are better in the red zone this year, he may end up taking it by a landslide.
Yep. Those numbers, again, for Burt Auburn to kick and make the most field goals by a wide margin of anybody in the country last year, if you cut those in half, you're looking at what should be a 30 touchdown season for Quinn, maybe 35. I'm right there with you. Those numbers should be pretty gaudy next year if they can figure that out.
And if they can't, Carson Beck will finish number 1.
Yeah, I'm with you. But that'll do it for today. Again, these are fun conversations, and we're right in the middle of the offseason because this is what we're talking about. Spring football underway. Again, we'll have all the updates coming not only on the YouTube channel, but on ontexasfootball.com. So go check out, join the community. We got a lot of fun updates. I hope your bracket is doing a little bit better than mine here. So we'll see. Again, by the time you watch this Sunday afternoon, Texas and Tennessee will have wrapped up. So we'll see. Any prediction looking back saying, is Texas getting it done?
Yeah, let's see. Let's talk about this for 1 second and see if this is right. So St. Peter's was one of the worst offenses in college basketball. So for Texas fans that just watched Tennessee in that game, they're like, oh my gosh, Tennessee's going to beat Texas by 30. And St. Peter's is awful offensive. They didn't even shoot 40% for the season and made the NCAA tournament. Okay. So that is one thing. Rick Barnes is going to try to bully Texas in the paint, rebounding the basketball. That's what he does effectively. So can Texas match physicality in the paint? Can they limit offensive rebounds? Ido, the big for Tennessee. And how does Texas handle the length at guard for Tennessee? If Texas, and I think it'll give them some issues. I don't think it's going to be a win or lose issue, though. But if Texas can handle those three things, and Texas does better than – if Texas can hit, 6 of 18 threes in that game, they can score enough to win the game. So it's going to be interesting to see. But for Texas fans, just watch Tennessee at St. Peter's, said, oh, my gosh. Well, St. Peter's is one bad offensive basketball team. Just remember that.
Well, good deal. And again, by the time you watch this, you'll have found out the outcome of that game. Texas will either be very happy watching this game or you're all going to skip through this last part of the video anyways. But again, for Gerry Hamilton, I'm CJ Vogel. Enjoy your Sunday fun day and hook 'em.